call to order the October 20th, 2020 meeting of Ag and Rural Affairs. First item on the agenda is approval of the minutes from the September 22nd meeting. Are there any additions, corrections, or deletions?
I have just a couple interjections, Ed. So for the agenda item 5, third paragraph, I just didn't like the language. I think it was the second sentence here. It kind of sounded like committee stated city correspondence sent to affected property owners. I don't like that language since nothing was sent. So I'd like to add in there maybe should have been sent to affected property owners.
Yeah, that was the intent, but I can make that clear.
Okay, perfect. I just didn't love how that was worded. I know that was the intent. And then at the very end, utilizing to develop property assessments right after that, and then maybe adding in programs that may lower costs.
Okay, and I would note that in item number 7, it indicates the next meeting is October 17th. Should be the 20th.
Yep, that changed.
Anything else? Motion?
Second?
All in favor? Aye. Motion passes. Agenda item number 2, public appearances for non-agenda items. Is there anyone here who wants to speak on something that's not on the agenda? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on. Agenda review, any changes, Wade? Okay. Item 5A, agricultural accessory related uses in city agricultural zoning districts. Wade, I'll let you take this from here.
I don't know, is a public comment after do we have a public comment?
Do we?
On your left there, Ed.
Oh, yeah, Jeff wanted to speak on this item. Do you want to speak now, or did you want to hear Wade's presentation on it first, Jeff? Okay.
All right, so give me a second here. I'm gonna share my screen. So at the last meeting we did, I kind of quickly went through this stuff. I'm not gonna spend a lot of time on it again today, but I'll just kind of give a brief overview. Again, we're really talking today about this idea of potentially ag accessory and ag-related uses in our ag zoning districts. And then we'll also, the next item will be our rural residential development criteria. And again, just review, I think people understand the importance of agriculture to our city and our region. So as we talk through issues today, let's keep in mind the big picture of economics, environment, and identity in terms of what that means for Fitchburg agriculture. Obviously, we're very proximate to a large urban region that's demanding a certain kind of agricultural product. So again, that's a real positive attribute in Fitchburg's favor. Just examples of all sorts of creative uses in agriculture that we're seeing in the region that, again, can really bring economic benefit to both landowner and the city. So that kind of brings us to Fitchburg. We do have policy in our comp plan as well as our ag plan that was recently adopted in 2017. And I think the real key to me, and I tried to emphasize this in the memo as well, is that we don't want to just maintain and enhance agriculture and it's land-based, but we also want to make sure that if we do allow rural development, that rural development is consistent with future urban development, meaning at someday at some point in time, we will be developing our rural areas in an urban manner. So what we do today in terms of allowing rural development will dictate what we can do 20 years from now in terms of urban development. So those are things to keep in mind as we talk about development of our agricultural areas. And then just, again, not to read you a laundry list, but these are what we are identifying as agricultural uses, pretty strict definitions, no surprises there.
Wait, I had a quick question.
Sure.
If you can back up a screen. So in the list of agricultural uses, forest management is on there. So do you know, and it may not be the question to ask, but we talked about this before, why doesn't that get an ag use assessment then if it's considered an agricultural use per our ordinance?
Again, there's a distinction between zoning and land use that I probably don't have a good explanation of that, but this definition comes from the Department of Agriculture in terms of land use, or zoning, I should say. You know, the assessments are a different ballgame, looking
Yeah.
at use, so, I mean, I can look into that. I don't have a good answer for you, though, at this point in time,
Okay,
so,
thanks.
yep. And actually, that would probably be a good question for Amy, if you want a real quick answer on that, but I can follow up with her.
Okay, thanks.
So then, more specifically, talking about ag accessory uses and ag-related uses, these are the things that we'll be digging into today. So again, we saw that list of ag uses. Now, these ag accessory uses are uses that essentially are support or incidental to or don't inhibit an agricultural use. Now, ag-related use are basically uses that directly support agriculture. So there's a lot of wiggle room in those definitions. And then we also want to talk about this idea of ag entertainment, which I think is an emerging trend. Currently, as our definition of ag entertainment is written, it could be considered either an ag accessory or an ag-related use. But what's very key about our definition of ag entertainment is it needs to be associated with a farm. And then it talks about a recommendation that staff made as we talk about tweaking our language in our zoning districts. And I do want to be clear that this recommendation didn't just come out of thin air. We did a lot of research. We talked with other communities that have similar land uses and issues that Fitchburg has. We looked at our plans, and I talked about our comp plan, our ag plan, looked at them very closely, interpreted policy direction in there, and then came up with a recommendation. So again, that recommendation is to continue to explore new permitted and conditional agricultural accessory and related uses that would expand opportunities for processing and distribution of ag commodities produced on site, as well as potential new ag entertainment activities. So that's point one. Point two would be to clarify the definition of ag entertainment. Again, ensure that entertainment use is directly connected to or dependent upon kind of a farm-based use. And my thinking's evolving a little bit on number two, and we can talk about that in a few minutes. I guess the gist of it is our definition might be sufficient as currently written, but we'll talk in more detail about that. And then the third piece of the recommendation is we kind of want to shut the door there. At this point in time, we would recommend not considering any new uses beyond those identified in number one and potentially number two. And then that kind of brings us to today, where we can talk more about specific policy language that would move us toward that staff recommendation. And obviously, if the committee wants to move in a direction different than staff recommendation, that's your right. I do want to point out in the memo that I included in the packet, which I think I'll try to flip back to that. Okay, so I'm on page 8 of the packet. So there's basically, or I guess page 7, excuse me, about midway down page 7. So basically what I did is I took the same memo that you guys received in your September packet and added a brief update based on discussion that we had at the last meeting. And essentially what that update says is that, again, staff recommendation has remained the same. How we came up with the recommendation. And then kind of following that, we get into this idea that if you guys want to explore other uses that staff isn't recommending, that's certainly your right, but I have a few questions that I want to make you all aware of as we go down that path, if we go down that path. And I think, I guess I'll get them out there now. So again, bottom of page 7, I think I did touch on it, but I think as you consider new uses, I would encourage you to be very cognizant of not just uses that maintain and enhance the city's ag economy, but also uses that don't paint us in a corner 20 years from now, if and when our urban development gets out there, and all of a sudden we got all these uses that will never fit in an urban landscape. So something to think about. So really what that leads to is this idea of kind of the first big question. If we do want to allow these types of uses, where should we allow them? Should it be anywhere in a rural area? Should it be only in our future urban development area? Or should they be only outside of our future urban development area? So these are all, again, kind of decisions that the committee should consider. The second kind of question issue is that, and I guess, we are getting some proposals on specific uses over the past couple of months, or at least some questions about specific uses. So I just want to point out that, we need to be very conscious of what those uses entail. And if they seem attractive right now, what happens if somebody proposes an undesired use 5 years from now that has some of the same characteristics of some uses that might be desired today? How do we rectify some of those issues as well? So just thinking about looking at every angle of potential future uses. And then I think kind of the final question would be, if we do want to consider additional uses, in what current zoning district should they take place? We've got 3 basic zoning districts: ag exclusive, ag transition, and what we call agricultural small. So staff would recommend ag small for a lot of reasons that we can get into. But I realize I'm throwing a lot at you, and I think maybe there I'd like to turn to a handout that I did hand out. It's this one-pager. It's got some red text on it. So I think before we get to the questions that I just spent the last 5 minutes on, I'd like to start with maybe some of the easier, low-hanging fruit that get back to kind of those permitted and conditional uses related to processing and distributing of agricultural commodities. So what I did, I took out some content of that memo, and a lot of this language comes right from our city ordinance. So we've got definitions of ag use, we've got definitions of ag accessory use, and we've got definitions of ag entertainment use. So I'm just going to quickly give you an overview of some proposed text changes to these definitions that tie back into the recommendation that staff is making. So the first issue, and this was brought up at the last meeting, so I'm about midway down the page, under the agricultural accessory use definition, we can potentially look at striking the words incidental to from 2 of our ag zoning districts. And I think what I'll do is I'll just get through all the potential changes, and then we'll come back and we can pick at them. So that was proposed at the last meeting. We can certainly explore that. Then I'm moving down to the bottom of the page where you see the definition of ag entertainment. Now this kind of gets into my earlier point about potentially expanding that definition. Right now, essentially what it's saying is that you can do any sort of ag entertainment activity, but it needs to be essentially located on a farm and a secondary use on that farm. So that's kind of the current definition. As staff has kind of unpacked that definition, I think that the definition as written could probably meet 99% of what we'd see in terms of potential ag entertainment proposals. It would not meet the one that has been discussed over the past few months. I do want to point that out. Moving onto the back page. So then what we do here is essentially identify tweaks to the permitted and conditional uses in those 3 agricultural zoning districts. And for folks that maybe aren't familiar with those 3 zoning districts, we have our exclusive ag district, which is basically for large farming properties, 35 acres or greater. Then we've got a transitional agricultural district, which essentially it's kind of an in-between zoning district. Basically, it's designating farmlands that are likely to be transitioning into urban development sometime in the near future. I do want to point out that currently that zoning district in our code does not have any size parameters on it. You don't have to be a certain size to be in that district. So one potential modification could be for this committee to come up with some size parameters for that district. And then our third district is what we call our small lot agriculture. And that basically can be anything from 3 acres to 34.99. So basically parcels for agriculture that are smaller than that exclusive agricultural district. Okay, so moving into kind of some use concepts. So again, we have our ag accessory uses and we've got our ag related uses. So starting with the ag accessory, and this was brought up at the last meeting, I'm on number B, or letter B, under permitted, under ag accessory. So this is about basically wind towers or manure digesters to serve a single farm. And at the last meeting, there was discussion about, what about these large-scale solar and wind farms? Are we addressing that in our current code? Well, what we currently do in our ag exclusive district, we do allow utilities, and we specifically call out wind energy as an allowable conditional use. What I am proposing, given current trends, is to also add the word solar to that. So we would also very clearly call out solar as a conditional use in the ag accessory district. And I think what's happening on the O'Brien property, obviously, that's a use of that type. So I think it makes sense to be clear in our code that we do allow that. Moving down the page, again, kind of as we talked about ag entertainment, in some of the ag districts, in the bigger ag district, ag exclusive, we allow for ag entertainment activities that have an attendance of less than 500 people. So you can have a lot of people out there being entertained by agriculture. And again, keep in mind, we're talking large parcels. So in our ag small district, we set that number to only 150. Now, I think we can have a discussion there about, is that really necessary? Because you could have a 30-acre ag small parcel that could very easily accommodate 500 people for an ag entertainment activity. But I think the gist of it there was, because the ag small districts have smaller parcels, they should be regulated and having less people attending their ag entertainment events. So something we can discuss in more detail as well. Moving down into conditional uses under ag accessory, this I think is probably one of the biggest changes in my opinion. And again, I think reflects what we're seeing in terms of local food system trends, kind of new agricultural uses in our region. And that's this idea of essentially selling of raw, processed, or value-added agricultural products produced primarily on a farm operation. So what I want you to think about when we talk about that, so think about apple garden, right? It's considered an ag use. They are selling cider, they are selling apples on site. As of now, that is currently a non-conforming use, meaning our current code doesn't allow for it, but because it was happening prior to our code being adopted, we allow for it. But the gist of it is to clean up the code, I would be proposing adding some language that would clearly state that you can sell products on your farm that you make or process on your farm. Moving below that into some of that italicized text under the conditional use heading. I think I already touched on that. The gist of it there is, do we want to make ag entertainment attendance different for differing size ag districts, or should we just kind of use the same attendance number? And my last change that I'm proposing, and again, this is a big change in my opinion, a good big change. Now we're talking about agricultural related uses. So these are uses that have that direct connection to agriculture. So currently our code just gives examples of potential allowable uses. I think we should maybe not state examples, but state these uses are allowable. You know, just be clear with that language. And then what I'm also proposing is under letter E, I think our current language says one example could be a dairy processing facility. And I guess I'm proposing to open that up and talk about any processing facility that's related to any sort of agricultural commodity. So not just dairy, but we're talking, you know, livestock, aquaculture, crops, apples, salsa, tomatoes, peppers, you know, anything under the sun that's coming out of a farm could be processed potentially on site. So I think with that, I will stop. I know I've thrown a lot at you, but again, the red text here is what I'm proposing as recommended changes. And then if there are changes, so we can discuss these. And then if there are changes outside of this, we can discuss that as well. So with that, I will turn it over to the committee.
Sounds good. So Jeff Schleicher would like to speak on this item. Jeff?
I'll keep this brief, but I just want to take a step back perhaps from the discussion last month and not talk about things today in light of the proposal that we have personally, but more so, is this something that might be good for Fitchburg and that you folks want to maybe keep open for consideration? I would look at it as an opportunity for Fitchburg to capitalize on a key component of ag tourism, economic development for the city as a whole and the rural area. So is this something good for Fitchburg that you want to at least keep the door open for? 4 quick points. Ag tourism and wedding barn venues in particular are big economic drivers. A Virginia Tech study found ag tourism to generate $2.2 billion of economic activity in the state in 2015. Major component was weddings and other social gatherings. The cost of an average wedding is $26,000 per article in the Wisconsin Agritourism and Farm News article. $14,000 of that goes towards ancillary businesses like caterers, florists, DJs, bakeries, photographers, transportation sector. And on top of that, perhaps more importantly, local hotels and restaurants are major beneficiaries of consumer dollars coming from outside the community. Annual hotel bookings from such a venue could exceed $1 million. Catering could exceed $500,000. And the rural community indirectly benefits with the creation of knowledge and interest in other ag-related businesses, as well as direct and indirect employment opportunities. So ignoring this opportunity would push these dollars to other communities. Fitchburg, and maybe that's why we're even here today, myself personally, is that it's uniquely positioned to take advantage of the opportunity to site barn wedding venues with its combined rural and urban centers. The rural area provides the beautiful setting cherished by wedding couples, but Fitchburg has the urban area already that has the hotels, the restaurants, and the other business offerings which can and will benefit from this influx of dollars from this economic driver. So to say we don't want this type of use of any of our rural land pushes this demand even farther away from the urban areas like Fitchburg that can most easily and safely support the ancillary demands of a wedding. Third, new construction versus rehabilitation of an old barn has many distinct advantages with respect to public safety, fire codes, ADA regulations, other city building codes, requirements, architectural review, not to mention operation with a liquor license and licensed bartenders, something that is often not required in a rehab barn scenario. And finally, wedding barn venues such as this creates a destination point for people outside of Fitchburg, which otherwise risks being identified as a bedroom community. And it also provides a city asset as a center for the celebration of life events for its citizens. So I believe the city should not shut the door on this potential economic driver with a blanket ban on wedding barns. Rather, I'd like to think we could figure out how we can allow the city to reap the benefits of such an opportunity and use our collective wisdom to draft a city ordinance to allow it with caveats that would at the same time not allow other detrimental business in the rural area. For example, maybe you could require that 75% of the property has to be left in cropland or otherwise natural state. That way you're preserving the rural nature of the area in your rural ag land. It requires structure to architecturally look like a barn, which is what you were suggesting in some of your comments. So bottom line, I think Fitchburg and the rural area can benefit economically immensely by allowing such wedding venues while preserving the rural landscape and architecture. So if you kindly keep that in mind in your discussion today.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thank you.
Appreciate it. Yeah, Raj.
I also looked into some economic impacts that might be interesting for us to consider on this type of venue, and I was surprised to find that over 15% of the weddings in the United States right now have been performed in a barn or a venue that, like we're talking about. And at the same time, the amount of weddings and whatnot that were held in motels or in hotels and that type of a venue actually dropped 10%, from 27% down to 17%. So without a doubt, there's a trend here that, I feel very strongly that we're in a position to seriously look at what it can do for Fitchburg. One other important fact that I found was that in Wisconsin, there's 150 wedding barns throughout Wisconsin right now. Seems like a large number, but that is a lot of interest in this, and it's moving that way. We also have a wedding barn that's going up in the township of Dunn, and which says that obviously there's a place for this type of deal that Jeff is talking about.
Thanks, Raj. So I want to remind the committee that we have a lot on our plate, and that the purpose of raising these issues was to come up with additional ways that we can help support agriculture in the city of Fitchburg. And we seem to be getting hung up on a request that is not on the agenda tonight. So we'll get to that, but what I'm going to suggest that we do, any comments that anyone might have, but I'd like to have Wade take us through the different points so we can make decisions on the points that we need to make decisions on so we can move this forward. George?
Yeah, I just have one question on, could a wedding barn also serve as an additional school for agriculture? To connect with some of the FFAs and stuff to use the facility.
And if I could just interject, I mean, I think that's, so if you look at the current definition of, just give me a second here, I want to switch back. So if you look at the current definition of ag entertainment, which is essentially what a wedding barn, quote unquote, would fall under. Actually, let me hold on here. Okay, so I have the definition up there on the bottom, middle of the screen. It's page 6 of your packet. So I think the key here is the first 4 words, a farm-based activity. So that's the key, George, is if there's a connection between, you can have weddings on Saturday,
Right.
and that's not farm-based, but if other portions of that property, if other uses of that facility are farm-based, then we're talking about something that fits within our current code. And even talking, again, with other municipalities, Dane County, I think kind of their best management practice is what I just described. So we have no problem with wedding barns, but there has to be a connection between that barn, quote unquote, a barn,
Right.
and the farm.
Yeah, I was just looking for that connection, also only through more of a,
Yep.
like tourism, right?
And it could take a lot of different forms, but I think the key is
Well, that,
agriculture, farming, yep,
Right.
exactly,
because like you say, weddings a lot of times are on the weekends. and-
right.
So Wade, do you want to kind of take us through the points on which we really need to kind
Yeah.
of make decisions here?
So I think what I'm gonna do, just to kind of maybe get the low-hanging fruit, and then we can kind of go backwards. I guess I would go to the back, the second page of the red text document that I handed out. And I think just starting out with letter B, under agriculture accessory permitted. So what I'm proposing there is basically adding solar energy, clearly spelling it out, as an allowable conditional use in our ag exclusive district.
So you're saying conditional as opposed to permitted.
Yep, and just some,
So it would go down below under
oh
conditional.
yeah, and the reason I put it there, Ed, was just, and technically it's not even an ag accessory use, I just was trying to show you that, because this is where we talk about wind energy. So, yeah, it's not very clear, but the gist of it would be is that this language would go under conditional use in our ag exclusive district. Not ag accessory, not ag related, but a standalone energy use. So really, all I'm doing is adding the word solar to this text. So it already says utilities including wind. I am just proposing to add the word solar. So it's a utilities including wind and solar.
But to clarify, are you proposing that wind towers and digesters would remain as permitted uses, or would this all
Yes,
be conditional?
that's all. I was just trying to fit this
Got it.
outlier into
Yep.
the format of the memo.
So
So
they
I'm
would
I'm
remain,
saying nothing about permit, this
Yep.
has nothing to do with permitted agricultural accessory uses.
okay, so those would remain as permitted, and the solar would go with the potential conditional uses.
Yes,
Okay.
yeah. Yeah, so again, really what we're saying here is these uses are all grouped under ag accessory. But what I just spoke to about the utilities, that's not ag accessory. So I just kind of stuck it here because we
Yep.
talked about wind towers. It's probably confusing, but,
I like putting it
My-
as a conditional use because,
Exactly.
the argument can be made that given Fitchburg's proximity to Madison,
Yeah.
that it's the ideal place to cover every acre of farmland that we have with solar farms.
Yep.
And that's what's gonna happen if you make this a permitted use. And the whole point we've been making is that it's also a great place to raise crops because of its proximity to Madison, but you defeat the purpose of that if you convert everything to solar.
Yep.
So if we're going to allow for it, I certainly would not want to have it as a permitted use, but conditional, where at least you can look at each particular request and make a decision, yeah, we are, or no, we're not on this one. At least it gives us that ability to say no.
And again, just to clarify, really all I'm trying to do is a housekeeping issue, because again, utilities and wind energy are already identified as conditional uses in the ag exclusive. I'm just really proposing to add solar. So I think it all ties together, yep.
So what happened in the O'Brien case? Did that remain in ag zoning, or is that converted to commercial?
Yeah,
zoning?
so I did check with Lisa, our zoning planner, and that is still ag exclusive. And I think they made an interpretation of current code that allowed for the solar use. I'm just trying to be much more clear now.
Clarifying.
Because in the future, to your point, we might see more of these. So now we're very clear that solar is a conditional use in the city's ag district.
Does that make sense to everyone? Anyone have a problem with that or want to discuss that further? We're good with that? Okay, sounds good.
Okay, then I'm gonna jump around here a little bit. Again, just trying to pick off some low-hanging fruit. So I'm gonna jump down to letter E, under conditional, just a few rows down. Now, again, I think, to me, this is a housekeeping issue that I think really we need to explore to take advantage of not just emerging trends in agriculture, but also some current uses in our city, namely apple garden. So again, this would propose, so currently we do allow what's called roadside stands. And I think you guys living in the rural areas, y'all know what that is, just kind of the small honor system box. You got the corner apples out there and people can, put in money and take whatever they pay for. So we do allow that as a permitted use. But this goes to that next step of like, just envision like a little dairy store, if people have been to Sassy Cow Creamery or Apple Garden, having a little separate indoor facility where you can sell products that are made processed on the farm. So that's kind of point A. Point B would be, we're kind of making sure that we account for any type of ag commodity. So it could be, an indoor farmer's market selling bushels of peppers or tomatoes. So that's the idea of raw. It could be processed, meaning someone's got a little canning operation or canning salsa and then selling it there as well. Or it could be value added, which essentially is very similar to processed, but the idea that you're creating a refined agricultural product, maple syrup, maybe that's an example, but just a product that has some level of processing in it, and then again, selling that as well. So again, in my opinion, something that I think is fairly non-controversial, but important that we do a better job spelling out in our code. And certainly you'll see Dane County, other rural townships in our region, they allow this type of stuff as well, so.
Questions, thoughts on that? Yeah, I like not just cleaning things up for Apple Garden, but actually putting something in here to state that that's the type of business we'd like to have in the rural. We'd like to encourage more of that, not just accommodate a business that happens to already be there. Okay.
Okay. Let's see here. I guess maybe another kind of straightforward one, moving down to the bottom of the page, under ag-related conditional. So I'm at letter E. So again, I guess two things here. One thing I forgot to call out. So if you go back up to right under the agriculture-related heading, we talk about in the code, we use the language examples, including. To be honest, I've been writing zoning codes for a while, and I don't quite know why we did that. I think the more you're clear with specific uses, the better. So I would just propose getting rid of examples and just saying, these are allowable conditional uses. So that would be one point. The second point under letter E. So again, what the code currently says is dairy processing. One example being dairy processing. Again, I'm just expanding that use a little bit to include any processing related to any agricultural commodity. So not just dairy, but we're saying, and I tried to be a little succinct with wording, we can certainly play with the wording, but the idea is livestock, aquaculture, so fish, livestock, and then any byproducts thereof, meaning milk, cheese, whatever might come out of a cow or, that kind of thing. And then crops. And by crops, we're talking about everything from, corn to vegetables to apples to, anything under the sun pretty much. So I think with that wording, we're capturing pretty much any sort of ag product that we would want to process, on a farm. So I guess I'll just stop there and see if folks have any thoughts. So this gets back to kind of the retail thing. So as an example, with this language, when we say processing, that could mean canning. So you could have somebody that's growing tomatoes, peppers. So that's the growing part. They have a little processing facility where they're canning the peppers and the tomatoes and the onions for salsa. And then they're distributing at the retail establishment all on site. So that's just one example of how you go from a raw product, processing, to distribution. So everything I just described would be allowable under the things that we're talking about right now.
Now, that wouldn't just be limited to, that could be in the urban service area?
Well,
You know.
This is relevant to our ag zoning district, so to the degree that we have any ag zoning in our urban service, yeah,
Because, you know, it may need that kind of facility.
Yeah.
Would be supported more with, you know, all the needs, utility-wise.
Yeah, that's a good point, and that's why I thought it was good to have it here as a conditional use, because certain processing facilities may not need urban service areas
Right.
and and could operate in the rural area outside of the urban service area, and others might need that, but we'd be able to take a look at each of those individual proposals as they come in and take that into consideration too, and say, well, maybe this one is not a fit. Maybe this would be a problem in a rural area where you don't have urban services.
and that's a good point for folks that are maybe new to like just zoning in general. So really, when we talk about zoning, we've got permitted uses and conditional uses. So permitted uses are basically uses by right, meaning if the use I want to do is listed as permitted, and I'm following every other zoning guideline, I can just go ahead and do that use. Conditional use means that the city as a governing body puts conditions on that use. And those uses have to be approved. So to Ed's point, let's say someone came in with some sort of processing facility or processing enterprise that we thought was good for the city, but we had some concerns about, or you had some concerns about. You as a body and the plan commission and the council can put conditions on that use. So then you make sure that as that use comes before you, you can approve it, but you can make sure that you safeguard whatever you need to safeguard. So I just want to be clear that just because it's a conditional use, governing body, people like you will still have an opportunity to weigh in and dictate how that use, ultimately happens.
We good on that?
Yep.
I mean, I think this whole section right here is where we really start to bring in some of the opportunities that we need as infrastructure for crops. And if Fitchburg is going to convert more to human food production, vegetable, fruit, that type of thing, dealerships, processing facilities, those are the things that you really need to make that work economically. And that's why I'm excited about getting this into our code and having some of these uses available.
All right, so maybe jumping back up to ag accessory permitted, and I'm on letter C, ag entertainment. Now, the issue here, again, so for our ag exclusive district, which is 35 acres or greater, so these are big farm properties, we say that you can have ag entertainment as a permitted use, but you can only have 500 people at one time during the day. So there is an upper limit of how many people can be on that farm for that activity. So again, that's the big farm parcels. What we also talk about in our small lot agriculture, which again can range from 3 acres to 35 acres, we say that you can have those same ag entertainment activities, but we're going to cap your daily attendance at 150. So I think the question before the committee is, should we keep that lower limit for smaller ag properties? Or do we just want to have a uniform attendance limit that applies across the board to all our zoning districts? Because as an example, you could have a 34-acre ag small parcel that's limited to that 150 people per day. And I would also argue that if you really, again, we can talk in detail about this, but I just, off the top of my head, even if I don't know, unless we're talking maybe a 3-acre site, you can accommodate a lot of people on 10 acres. So I just don't know if that 150 is completely relevant, that limit, or if we want to explore, boosting that number up a little bit. Does that make sense to people? The issue?
What makes the difference of whether we've got 35 or 36 acres or 40 acres.
Right, well,
I mean,
again, I think.
why are we, the event,
Right, I think the rationale is, let's say under ag small, you could have a 3-acre parcel.
yeah,
And right now, we're saying if you had an ag entertainment activity on that 3-acre parcel, the most people you could have there during the day at one time is 150.
why?
Because I didn't write the code, but I think the why is because of the size of the parcel. But that's kind of my point, is I think when we're talking 3
Okay.
acres or bigger, I don't know, I guess that's a question for you guys. You guys are more familiar
Yeah.
with
Well,
sizes, but I mean, would it be feasible to have 500 people at one time on a 3-acre property for an ag entertainment activity? That's the real question.
you could pack them in, you're right. I mean, so we're,
But then not to interrupt you, but then just some more context, the flip side of that is, so let's say we agree that 150 makes sense on the 3-acre parcel because it's so small. But you could also have a 34-acre ag small parcel, much bigger, but still within the ag small district, and then still be limited to 150 people.
yeah,
See what I'm getting at?
yeah.
That's just what I'm saying, is and I don't know what the sweet spot is, but that's the issue. And what I see happening, to be honest, is if we really want to encourage ag entertainment, I could see in the future a lot of these uses being pushed into the ag small district, and maybe not the ag exclusive. So what I'm getting at is, if we really want to promote ag entertainment, we need to be conscious of not creating restrictions on attendees that would hurt a ag entertainment business model.
Yeah, that's my point.
Yeah.
That is my point. The economics will not work in some cases at 150 if you've got a big establishment. And we're ruling that when we put a limit on it. I don't know where that spot is right now.
And again, we don't have to figure everything out today, but these are just things
Yeah,
that,
something to think about.
So if someone were putting in some sort of a facility that were going to be used for entertainment purposes, and it were coming in as a conditional use, and we felt that there was some reason, given the size of that particular parcel or what the facility was doing, that it needed to be limited to less than 500 people. We could do that at the time of approval of the conditional use, correct?
yeah, I mean, I would think so, yeah.
And set that limit there, rather than having an overall limit, which is kind of problematic, and so
So-
if 500 is a good number on
It-
35 acres, maybe it's a good number on 5 acres too.
Yeah,
And I guess to that point, and you're more familiar with zoning than I am, to be honest, but I mean, can you actually override in a conditional use with conditions that contradict the actual, you know what I'm saying? So if we actually have numbers in here for conditional uses, are we supposed to abide by them no matter what? Or could we have a condition that, you know what I mean? I think that's a
Yeah.
question that I should,
Yeah,
Well, they take to our
maybe
staff.
Valerie can address, but we put time limits. I mean, this operation doesn't start before 8 AM, doesn't go past 10 PM.
sure, and that makes sense because we don't explicitly say in our code that, generally speaking, everything needs to be between 8 and 5. I think here the difference is we're actually coming up with a number and then potentially creating a condition that contradicts,
That-
you know what I mean?
Isn't there some regulations related more to police and fire that establish?
Yeah, so that's
Numbers
basically
on
related to, I think, sprinklering of facilities. That's a good point. I don't think that's an issue here, but I'll look into that, yeah.
I would think that there would be something there with, and now I'm thinking outdoor venues may be a lot different than like an indoor facility that,
I think you got
but there's gotta be some regulations, I would think,
Yeah.
outside of our parameter.
But Ed, I think you make a good point now that I think about it. I mean, I think, maybe that's where you're going, and I just wasn't following, but potentially what you could do is keep the parameter for attendance in the permitted use at 500, and then the conditional use could be vague on a number, with the number being set as
At the
the
time of
use comes
approval.
in, yeah.
would you, in the conditional use, would you use the thought that it could be more than 500?
Well, I mean, I guess that's maybe something I should look into too, just get a sense of, you know, what ag entertainment activities might we see in the next 10 years and what kind of numbers those activities are drawing. I think 500 is probably a pretty good upper limit. And if you just think about traffic and,
Yeah, that'd be my concern too, is where do we go traffic-wise if you have
but I can look into it.
Okay. Yeah,
10,000 seat arena so Roger could put on rock and roll shows at his farm.
yeah, I'll get right on that. I'll get right on that.
And what I can do is again, kind of given what I'm hearing, I can come back to the next meeting with a couple different options and you guys can pick the best one.
Okay.
Okay. And then I think that kind of addresses what I was getting at in the italicized text, kind of midway through the page, so we'll check that off for now. And then I guess going up to the top of the page, and I might need to check in with the zoning administrator and other planning staff, because there may be a rationale here as to why we didn't identify a size parameter for our transitional ag district. But I just want to kind of throw this out there for folks. So again, our transitional ag district is kind of this, it's a district that is zoned for lands that are currently ag but are likely to become development in the near future. I think generally speaking, the uses are the same as ag exclusive, but I'm just wondering if folks have any thoughts on should we be developing a size parameter for that ag transition district, or is it okay as it is? I mean,
So we were actually tried to eliminate the AT district by rezoning everything that was AT to either AX or AS. But some people didn't want their properties rezoned.
okay.
So my understanding is we're not rezoning anything to
Okay,
AT.
got it. I
right?
didn't know that. Okay. Honestly, I wasn't aware of that, but I like to hear that because in the years I've been in this profession, I always thought ag transition was, it's a land use, it's not a zoning district. So I'm glad to hear that you guys tried to maybe rectify that, but if folks want to remain in that, so be it. I guess I'm just thinking, like, would there ever be a scenario where, let's say someone is remaining, you said, okay, so there'd be no scenario where they have a 40-acre ag transition and they want to split it up. Would it remain an ag transition? I mean, could they potentially create these weird, small ag transition
Or
lots?
couldn't we require a rezoning to AS at that time?
Yeah, no,
If they're looking for something. I think that the city did not want to force people to rezone
okay.
from AT if they didn't want to, but there also doesn't seem to be any particular advantage
No,
to having AT.
I think probably if I'm a landowner and I'm not fully cognizant of the way things work at City Hall, I would think that maybe,
There's more flexibility.
well, and that I'm going to be ripe for development. You know what I mean? I can just,
That's exactly what happened. Yep.
Okay, well, let me dig into that one a little bit more. I don't think we need to spend a lot of time on it today, but given what Ed's told me, there may not be a need to go down that path. Because my only concern was, again, if there's ag transition districts that somebody wanted to split up for some reason, and they just created some really small, weird ag lots that, because we don't have a size parameter on them, you know, a 2-acre ag transition lot, I don't know,
Right,
but,
yeah.
okay. Okay, so I will look into that and maybe come back with a recommendation next time. So I think that covers the back page. Flipping to the front, let's go up to the middle of the page there in the incidental. Now, I think what we talked about last time was there was an interest in maybe striking the word incidental to from the definition of ag accessory use. And again, this use definition essentially comes from DATCAP, our state Department of Agriculture. And that definition is included in our ag exclusive district, which basically has requirements that we need to abide by that DATCAP puts before us. So at first blush, I would recommend keeping that language in our AX district, but we could potentially remove it from the other two districts, the ag transition and the ag small. Now, I think what that would ultimately do, in my opinion, is make uses in those districts much more connected to agriculture. Because the word incidental means, well, I know you guys know what it means, but the way I interpret it is that, that allows for a lot of wiggle room of uses that maybe aren't really ag-related, but don't inhibit ag. I don't know what, maybe a home occupation of some sort, pet grooming or hair cutting or whatever it might be. So I just want you guys to be clear kind of what that would entail. Generally speaking, as a staff person, I don't have a problem with it. I think if it remained in there, I don't see it being a dangerous, slippery slope either. Given the way we interpret uses and other policy that we can rely on to restrict undesirable uses. But so that's kind of the issue, and certainly can take direction on what the committee might think on that.
Would we, and you probably can't answer this off the top of your head, but I wonder if we would have situations where we would, if we did this, if we would be creating non-conforming uses, which maybe we don't want to do.
Yeah, to me, I mean, unless you as a committee can point to recent example over the past 10 years where someone has used this language to get a use in that you guys ultimately thought was undesirable, I'd say let's leave it. And a lot of those uses I've mentioned as examples that could be incidental, those probably weren't the best examples because those would be considered home occupations, which are allowed anyways. So I think, again, this language came from DATCAP, and I think what DATCAP was trying to do was they recognize that farming is changing and that the more they can do to allow farmers to stay on the farm, but also create alternative revenue streams, I think that was the goal. And I think as a city, if we're cognizant of that trend as well, I think, if we can keep farmers on the farm, and if that means they have to create an additional revenue stream that might be a use that's incidental to ag but doesn't impede ag, I think as a city, that's not a bad place to be.
So are we good with leaving that language as it is then?
Yeah.
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 I think it was my suggestion, and I'll withdraw that. Okay.
Okay, now I guess kind of the, so I think that just leaves us with this idea of ag entertainment, and I think that kind of ties into some of the other things we've been talking about today. Maybe a good place to, good to be last on this conversation piece. So again, right now, ag entertainment can cover a lot of different things. As a planner that's worked in Fitchburg for a while and I've worked with you guys for a while, I think ag entertainment is great. The more we can do to promote it, let's do it. But we just need to be really careful what is ag entertainment. And I think that's the real question today. So again, this is the current definition. I'm on the bottom of the page there. Farm-based, to me, that's the kicker here. Again, I think if we're really talking ag entertainment, a literal definition of it would be something that supports a broader farm use or somehow is connected to agriculture, whether it's education or whatever. So, just as an example, wedding barns that I know of in the past, it could be maybe a son or daughter that converts the barn to a wedding venue. It remains part of the farm. Mom and dad are still farming or renting out the farmland. But it's a piece of that farm, and it's that additional revenue source that we talked about. But there is that direct connection to the broader farm. Now, that's one example. There certainly could be other examples where a wedding barn that didn't fit that description could meet this idea of farm-based. But I think, as I think about what makes sense in Fitchburg, those are the things that I think about, so.
So Wade, what kind of is the position of staff with regard to the urban service area, and what should be in the urban service area, and what, can potentially make sense outside of the urban service area?
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes back to, just this idea of looking at the memo, our ag uses and anything related or accessory to that. I think generally speaking, in our urban service area, we want uses that would require city sewer and water. Large apartment buildings, single-family homes, commercial, industrial uses, gathering venues, events, those sorts of things. And then our rural areas are to, kind of remain agriculture, obviously uses that would be sufficient on a well and a septic tank. But I think that's, if I had to just broadly distinguish between urban service and non-urban service, I mean, that's the gist of it, is urban service. What requires sewer and water, and what can get by on septic and well. And I think another.
Sewer and water, but it's also fire. I mean, do you have a fire hydrant there?
Right, yep. And then I think just this idea of traffic, the rural nature or the nature of our rural lands. So those are all things we think about, as we decide what makes sense in an urban area, what makes sense in a rural area. I do want to point out, traffic, as you well know, Ed, traffic is like the ubiquitous planning issue that can be used to reinforce a point or to poke holes in a point. I think when we talk about traffic in the rural areas, we do need to be careful, because a lot of the things I just described in terms of uses that I think would be good for Fitchburg in our rural areas will draw traffic. If we're getting really good quality ag entertainment uses, if we're getting apple garden type uses, those things will draw traffic. It's just at what level and how do we manage it. So as we talk about, what makes sense and what doesn't make sense in the rural areas, I just want the committee to be conscious of, traffic could certainly be a negative, but will also be a necessary, quote unquote, evil of some of these uses that we want to encourage.
Do we have any kind of different direction, either from staff or from code right now, with regard to church issues in the rural areas? We've had a couple of placements of churches in the rural areas, and
Yep.
there's always kind of that question: is that an appropriate use
Right.
outside of the urban service area?
Yeah, generally speaking, our current policy in our comp plan really steers us away from non-residential development in non-agriculture, non-residential development in our rural areas. I think in the past, some churches have squeaked through based on a little bit of some unique circumstances. But I think as a general policy, we want to limit those sorts of kind of sporadic social gathering uses that aren't related to ag in our rural areas. So,
And keep those in the urban service area?
correct,
Yeah.
yep.
Okay.
Because, I mean, you think about a use like that, there's really no reason why a use like that would need to be located in the rural area, besides the land is cheaper to the buyer. And I think that's important to keep in mind too, is, what uses that are maybe take advantage of the rural landscape versus uses that enhance the rural landscape or the agricultural use. So.
So I think we got to figure out whether we're going to kind of, where we sit on ag entertainment, and, what we feel is going to be a fit and what isn't. And I think, I think we got to take a look at also what the city's general policies are with regard to these types of uses in a rural area, and I would hope we would be consistent with that.
I think what really looking at right now is, and maybe this is not the time to start to dwell on it, but we've got an issue in front of us right now with this wedding barn venue. How do we fit that in here?
Why do we fit that in there would be my question.
Right, and what if we do, what parameters are we gonna put on it? You know, I think there's certainly lots of issues on it, but I'm for one, I don't wanna just throw it out. I think we ought to continue to look at it, and if it doesn't fly, it doesn't fly, but I think we've got a lot of investigation to go yet on that subject. And so I don't know where we'd go from here on it. I guess, the easiest way is just add it, but that isn't the way you want to do it, because you are adding something you don't know, you haven't thought it out.
Right, that's what this body has to do.
That's
is
right.
we need to divorce this discussion from a specific request and talk about this in general and say, all right, first off, is this something that we want, and why do we want it, and why do we think it's appropriate outside of the urban service area? And then, if we're going to do it, how many of these do we want? Do we want one, or do we want 20? And where are you gonna draw the line? And if you don't want 20, then we gotta figure out under what circumstances would we say yes to this, and at what locations would we say yes to this? And I mean, if you ask me, and you're talking about something that's on a county highway, and it's an existing barn that is going to be rehabbed for a use like this, I would still share staff's concerns that you're putting a facility like that outside of the urban service area. But I could sort of see the argument for it as well. But if what we're talking about doing is opening this wide up so that, people can build a facility like this on any rural road that they want to build on, and there's no limit to the number of these that are going to happen, and how are you going to say yes to one person and no to everybody else? We've got a tough decision here to make, and I think this body has got to make this decision and move this forward. So I don't think it is an easy decision, but
No.
it's.
And I could just add on to that, I think, just to take off on Ed's point, I think we also need to consider, or the committee needs to consider, if you like certain uses, that's fine, and you think they can fit in the broad picture of Fitchburg land use policy, that's fine, but you also need to be conscious of, and I hate to use this term, but a slippery slope, and keeping the door open for other uses that you may not have anticipated, that in no way make sense in the rural areas, but because you've crafted certain policy language, these uses will now come knocking at your door as well. So, and those are all things as planners we try to be conscious of. It's not just what's before us now, it's what could come before us over the next 10 years that the use may not even be out there yet, but how do we close the door on those undesirable uses as well?
One point that Jeff made that I really liked hearing was keeping a certain portion of the venue, 75%, I think he stated, in cropland. I kind of heard that. So, and that would be easier for me to drive by than a blacktop. I don't know where we're going with this. I don't want 20 of them. I really don't. One sounds really cool to me. 20 sounds really ugly. That's my small thought.
Would this have to be, meet all of the rural residential criteria, as far as
No,
location?
so that's just
You
for
know, that's-
residences. But what I think Dad's earlier point is,
Yeah.
if you want to explore this kind of use, it could be a conditional use,
Right.
and then you could
I
put
mean,
conditions.
the types of soil, location, and I know that the traffic issue has got to be put in there probably. But yet, it seems pretty specific. For one, I don't know how you could go ahead and, open the door for 20 then. I just don't know how you'd regulate it, but
Where do we start? Where do we start? Do we start with what we got in front of us? Tear it apart?
Yeah, well, I mean,
Well, go ahead.
if you're looking at existing barns, then you don't have that issue of what the soil is or what the past use is. It's a barn. It's been there for a long time. The rest of this farm is gonna remain in agriculture. This facility is gonna be using, the ones that I've been at, they don't have blacktop. I don't know, I guess the ones that I've been to, you're parking in a field that can
Yeah.
also be planted and used for other things at different times of year, or used as pasture, whatever it might be. You're not blacktopping the whole thing, I would hope, right?
Well, that might be part of the argument. I mean, we may not want that. I mean, I've been to a couple different ones. Some are gravel, some are fields. I haven't seen any blacktop, but who's to say that they don't want blacktop? So, I mean, that's part of the equation, I think, that we have to narrow in on. Now, I will say that I have gotten some feedback from, and I spoke to you yesterday, Wade, from, we think it's the town of Dunn, and it was mentioned earlier about another similar venue on East Clayton and Larson Road. The constituents on East Clayton were not notified of the barn, this venue, and however, they are in our understanding, the town of Dunn, and they received permission to move ahead with the project. Now, Fitchburg is impacted by it, and those that live on East Clayton Road are not pleased with all the traffic that will be going back and forth. Those are just what I've heard so far from constituents.
So the neighbors weren't notified of the request, yet it was approved by,
The town
Town.
of Dunn, if that is, that's our guess, if that's the municipality. The Fitchburg residents were not notified. Yeah.
And that's not on the border of Fitchburg, Dunn?
Yes, it
is?
seems to be where East Clayton Road and Larson come together.
Right,
Yeah.
So that is,
So it's not, yes, it's somewhere up in there, and it's not
right on the.
It's not on the Fitchburg side, so. Yeah, so sounds like you're familiar with the location. Yeah.
I was just thinking that would have had to come to Fitchburg for extraterritorial jurisdiction. I didn't know if that was.
To be quite honest, since I'm new, I'm just looking into it, and,
well, if it wasn't a rezoning, they wouldn't.
No.
right,
Yeah.
right. That would be my guess as well, but,
Yeah, the barn there already existing, and I think
Right.
there's.
So that's an existing barn that's being converted.
But I think they are it's a new structure they're rebuilding, but they had a farmhouse and a barn there, and I think they tore the barn down, and now they're rebuilding this. That's what it looks like.
Got it.
and this was only brought to my attention because some of the constituents on East Clayton were upset.
I'd like to think about the idea of working with something with an existing barn versus a new structure barn. I, like everybody else, have been to some of these events, and quite frankly, I have to assume if we're looking at a existing facility, we're looking at it fitting into the current viewscape, and it fits in. But I've been to a couple of these where they are new and they are designed specifically to fit in. And, with the type of siding and all that kind of stuff. It just looks like a barn that has been, an existing barn that's almost been remodeled. Very well done. From the standpoint of fire protection and everything, with watering, with sprinklers and everything, in a new facility, easy to bring up to code. A lot easier to bring up to code. Another thing that I was reading about some of these people, though, I was reading an article on this type of thing, and And some people were kind of afraid to go to the thing because they go, gee whiz, that's an old barn. This is way out in left field, but this is what some people thought. It's an old barn, and what's to say the floor's not going to give in? Well, you know that this, but that's the way people see in an old building. You know that code would never allow anybody in there unless it was right. But those are some of the things that have been, you know, people that have different thoughts about things. Yeah, your handicap accessibility is better. There's a lot of I think, pluses in considering what's the aesthetics of a new building could do as well as an existing building. And, you know, I'll go back to what we're looking at that's in front of us right now. We've got a 30-acre farm. You know, it's not going to take all 30 acres. We've mentioned the fact that, you know, that there's going to be cropping on it. So I think that, but I think those are some of the things that we want to consider, which way we want to go on that issue, and as well as many more.
Yeah, I think location is going to be a really important one.
Oh,
I mean, again, do you want something like this on a rural road? Are you okay with that? Are you okay with that level of traffic? On a
absolutely.
rural road as opposed to a county highway, or at least a bigger road? I don't,
Well, if it depends, to me, it depends on, you look at a rural road, there's good rural roads that handle, you know, traffic well, you know, the shoulders are good and everything like that. There's other rural roads that, you know, have got hazards in them. And I don't think that we can't overlook that, because, and quite honestly, in this particular case that Jeff is bringing forward, I mean,
you know, I think we want
that's
to
a real issue.
I think we
out
want to
there.
be careful in our discussion. I mean, we don't have a request on the table here. We're discussing this in general terms, and
Yeah.
we need to keep it.
But I think it's important, one way to start to look at some of these things that we have to make decisions on is, right, we do not have something in front of us, but we got a pattern, we got a template that is in front of us to start to look at, you know, and then we can start to pick it apart. So from that standpoint, you know, I think that's a place to start. Because I frankly, if I were to start to put something together, you know, I'd be, you know, just pulling stuff out of the air to say, well, this may be, not that maybe. But since we do have a template right now, why, I think, boy, we've got a chance to start something. If we're going to want to pursue to put this into the entertainment category.
Well, that's, I guess, the first decision that we've got to make is whether we want to
Yeah.
incorporate this type of use into. Are there other questions with regard to entertainment? Or is this really the only kind of pressing one right now, is do we or do we not include wedding barns?
I mean, kind of just as I was thinking as you guys were talking, I mean, I think what would be helpful, maybe for the committee, that I can do is flesh out this definition of ag entertainment, because right now it's just a paragraph that's lumping in apples and oranges. I think what might be helpful for the committee and for me is to start calling out some of these specific ag entertainment uses, and then exploring parameters on those uses. Because I think a wedding barn is a much different use than a corn maze, right? So we're trying to make the ag entertainment definitions be a one-size-fits-all. I think to do this justice, we might want to, I can spend some time kind of fleshing that out. But I think to your initial question, I think this idea of an event space in the rural area is kind of forefront as it relates to this ag entertainment issue, and how do we address that?
So we could give you better guidance by having some sort of a decision here tonight, or, you know, a straw poll, whatever it might be, as to whether
Yep.
this committee is in favor of looking at that.
Yep. And maybe before you do that, if I could just clarify a few things. So in the current ag entertainment definition, again, it doesn't specifically identify wedding barns or event spaces, gathering spaces, but it does say that an ag entertainment use can be in a new, it says it doesn't necessarily have to be located in an existing building. So currently as written, again, if it meets the farm-based test, you could build a new building. So just think of it as like a farmer building a new barn or a storage facility to support his ag operation. Well, now he's building a new ag entertainment building to support his ag entertainment. So I think the existing versus new building is important, but I want to be clear that there is allowance for new buildings to be built in our current definition. So that's, I guess, point one. Point two, I think, would be, maybe to just, I guess, provide me some direction on what you guys are leaning towards. So I think two questions, farm-based or non-farm-based, and new building or existing building. Those, to me, are kind of the key pieces of this puzzle because, again, not to keep going back to, but just so you guys understand what this definition would support would be a farm-based existing or new building. What's also out there now is a non-farm-based new building. So that's kind of the way, in my head, I kind of categorize things.
Yeah, I think one thing about building a new building, you could repurpose a lot of barn boards and things from, there's so many like the Monte farm, the barn that was moved down, that Raymond moved down off of Burn Road. I mean, there's an example there, a beautiful facility, and it was just repurposed. I'm just throwing that out there as far as, when you say new, it doesn't have to always be, brand new lumber. It could be repurposed from an older facility and brought in there because there's a lot of it out there, let me tell you.
So as an example, the current definition, one example it gives is a haunted barn. So the way I read that definition is I could build a new building that, I only use a month out of the year, but if it's related to my farm, I can use that from October to November as a haunted barn. So that's I guess, again, just some more context.
So what are your two questions again that you want us to handle?
Well, again, I think it's, I think the first issue is, does the use need to be related to the farm use or not? Is it related to agriculture or is it taking advantage of the agriculture? So, a wedding barn in an existing building would be, to me, relying on the farming. It's part of the farm. A new building that has no connection to agriculture, that's a whole different ballgame. So is it related to the farm or is it not? That's question one. Question two is new building or existing building?
If you look at Fitchburg right now, I'm sure there's some barns out there that could maybe be converted that I don't know about. But right now, if I were to, look at Fitchburg, where would we find a barn that could be converted? And more importantly, we're really limiting this type of venue and the economic impact that it can bring to Fitchburg by saying, hey, you can come in, but you got to find a barn. Whereas if we go out there and we say, okay, yes, we will allow you to build a barn, new, but here's the parameters that we want on it to fit the agricultural viewscape, I think that would be a better way to go than to limit ourselves.
Again, I'm not explaining myself, but the current code says you can build a new barn, you can build a new building, but the new building has to be part of a farm. That's it.
Well, if I own 100 acres and I want to build a building, is that part of the farm? Oh, okay.
if you're building it for farm purposes.
I'll
Like,
put,
if the primary purpose is for farm purposes, and you're also going to use it as a wedding barn, right?
Right,
I got an old antique plow. I'll put it in it. Does that qualify?
Is that the slippery slope you want to go down?
No, but,
Oh, thank you. I'm glad to hear that. I'm a little concerned.
no, but somebody could take that and turn
Well,
it around.
and
That's why I think-
somebody will, Raj.
I know
And
it.
somebody will.
I know it.
And that's why we have to be very careful.
Yeah, yeah.
and that's where I think the key to this is farm-based. I think the interpretation of farm-based.
Okay.
And that's what I was saying earlier in the discussion, that could mean, that could mean a lot of different things. I think a literal interpretation of it would mean, it's on Farmer Joe's property,
Yeah.
and it's a secondary use to the farming operation. It's not a separate parcel owned by a different person with a couple acres of crops that are rented out.
Quick question, Wade. So could owning crop ground, say I have 50 acres and I have no connections, I just bought 50 acres that's in crop ground, and I decide, I have that and I rent it out and I generate revenue from that. I build a new building up there that I want to use for a wedding venue. Is that going to be secondary to my agriculture use?
Well, that's kind of what I'm getting at, is the interpretation of farm-based, because the literal definition of farm that we rely on in our code essentially says land under common ownership in agricultural use.
Okay, so it's.
So to Ed's point about a slippery slope, that's where we really need to figure out, like, yeah, exactly. And then I think part of this too is an ag entertainment use being secondary to the farming use, meaning the primary use of that land is farming. That's where you're making the majority of your money.
Okay,
A secondary accessory use implies a lesser use with lesser, I mean, I'm generalizing, but, lesser revenue. So,
okay.
but yeah, those are all the issues that you guys will have to think about, yep.
Well, it seems like you're looking for something in here that would support agriculture.
Right.
And if you bring in a large number of people to a wedding in a barn, and wedding barns are more and more popular, because people want to go out into the rural area to get married, and then they bring family and everything. So you're actually advertising your Fitchburg agriculture in that sense too.
Yeah, just-
If there's some way that it can be connected, like with, I don't know, museum or something in there, or that
Yep.
displays Fitchburg ag over the years, or something that would help support agriculture.
Yeah, and your point is valid. When I started doing this stuff years ago, I think part of the whole argument here is how do you get people exposed to agriculture? And once they're exposed and educated, then they they know where their food comes from.
Yeah.
Then maybe they start thinking differently about development, or, you know what I mean? And maybe that's a little bit idealistic, but your point is well taken. But there might need to be a little bit more of a firm connection between,
Yeah, like
an ag use
if
and,
you could use the barn for an open market during the week or something, and a wedding on the weekend or something, but I don't know how you word that or connect that.
just so people, time check, we probably should be out here by 6. Certainly, we don't have to get to everything on the agenda today, but just kind of a time check.
Scott, is there anything you want to say? You've been quiet. I want to make sure you get an opportunity to speak since you're not here in person.
Well, sure, thanks. I think there's a lot of valid points with everything. I guess my take on it is I'm for either new construction or existing, but I also feel to keep the integrity of the rural atmosphere, it has to have some sort of use with the farm itself.
Thanks.
Sure.
think that's a good comment Scott made on integrity of our rural agriculture. I think we should somehow keep that going. Yep.
So something that's being built new would be also for agricultural purposes. It could double
Possibly, if there's a way we can make that work.
as a venue, but it would also be for
Well,
agriculture.
it seems to me that, I don't know, is there some way, way that you can look at other communities that have made this work, what they had to go through?
Yeah,
Because
Yep.
it seems like if you could use that barn for more than just weekend weddings to help support its, for economic viability, you'd think it would help.
yeah, yep. Yeah, I did talk with Dane County a little bit, and I can go dig deeper with them, but yeah, I think their general practice was, I think it could be new or existing, but again, definitely secondary to and part of a bigger farm. But I don't know if they said that the barn, quote unquote, has to not just serve weddings, but also ag. But the idea is that it's part of the broader farm.
Just to give you an example of what I've experienced is there's a barn down in the town of Oregon that is used for milking, and then on the weekends, it's cleaned out and there's barn dances and wedding venue. There's another establishment that also farm equipment is kept in the barn, and then same scenario, if there is a wedding venue, or if there's a wedding ceremony booked for a weekend, all the equipment gets moved out, it gets cleaned up, and the people are able to celebrate their wedding in it, just to kind of give you an idea of how I've seen some things done at different locations.
Yeah, I remember Apple Garden when we had the Fall Farm Festival over there. They had square, when Vern was alive, and they had square dancing upstairs after the festival. It was pretty neat.
Should I just kind of go back and come back next month with some ideas, or any direction the committee wants to provide me with?
I kind of like where Scott's going with it, that, the building should be,
Okay.
if the new building is going up, it should be primarily for farm purposes. And if it's also going to be, to use as this fine, or if you have an existing building on an existing farm and you want to use it for these purposes, because maybe a dairy barn isn't being used for dairy anymore,
Okay.
Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, I understand where you're coming, but I just, I'd have to give some thought to this, but I don't think we want to limit ourselves. We're really, that's a pretty strong deal to have a building. If you're building a new building and now you've got to figure out a way to make it fit into the existing parcel that you're putting it on, are we going to be really tying our hands to somebody that wants to put a venue in because they don't have a bunch of equipment, or they don't have cattle that they clean out to have it? I just have to think about that a little bit, but I sure don't think we want to narrow ourselves down with so many restrictions that we can't say yes to people, on something like this. But yet we have to be conscious of what we really want. But
And how much of it you want.
and how much we want of it, exactly. I don't see us having 10, 15 of these, or by any means, by a number, but
But maybe it's not wedding purposes, maybe it's something else. Somebody wants to do it for some other purpose, and
well, we have to be careful.
Yeah.
On that. We have to be very careful on that. That's the thing about it is, the other thing that happens is you don't like to think about it, but what happens if something, you don't want to think a negative on it, but what happens if this thing goes, we accept one and it goes broke? And there sits a building,
somebody wants to do something different with it now.
Now of course, we could write into the original agreement or whatever, in our zoning on it, say it can only be used for this or that. That would limit anybody coming in to put a business in that we wouldn't want. But, we have to look at that thought. That's a thought we don't like to think of, because that means we made a bad decision to start with. But
Yeah.
I think, we have to be careful not to tie our hands to passing up an economic benefit.
Well, yeah, but the problem with that is that you can make that argument for just about anything you decide you want to put in the rural area, because that's where the dirt is cheaper. And that's exactly the argument that's going to be made, is people are going to come in, well, this is an economic benefit to the city. Great, put it in the urban service area. And that's exactly what we're opening ourselves up to. If the purpose of our ag preservation program, our policy, and this committee is to support agriculture, well, I think that's what we should be doing, rather than finding ways to convert agricultural land to non-agricultural uses. And that's the road I don't want to go down. And I don't want to start here. Because once you start here, you're going down that road. And I mean, that argument can be made for a myriad of different uses. And that's what concerns me. So you take this one on its own and say, oh, but this is great because it'll fit in with agriculture. It'll fit in with the landscape, and it creates economic value. Okay, well, all sorts of things could. You could build anything that looked like a barn and use it for just about any purpose you want to use.
I'm going to interrupt you guys because you just jogged something in my mind, Ed. I actually am sitting here and I could really care less to talk about developing anything in the rural agriculture area. What I'd like to be talking about is a program for the sale of land development rights in the rural area.
Mm-hmm.
That's what I would like to be talking about, but I just interjected a thought.
I think that's something we should get on the agenda.
We have to get
It has
working
been on the
this.
agenda in the past.
And it's been done successfully in the town of Dunn.
Yeah.
And before my time is up, I would like to see.
See that as a future agenda item?
That's something that really means the most to me as I sit here.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry.
Yeah.
No, but I agree with you, because the point is to preserve agriculture and not convert it,
And
right?
I hear urban service area and development, and I just had to say it. So I did.
Good. You're right. Like Ed said, we have kicked that around, oh gosh, for many years. And it's maybe time to bring it up again.
I think it is. The town of Dunn has done it successfully, so why can't we?
Have we given you enough mixed direction?
Oh, no, I'm good, I'm
Or
good.
misdirection?
There's a reason a woman sits up here. Shake it up.
And I guess maybe a
Their
good,
purpose
if,
over there is
Ed, do you want to just
purchasing
get everyone's
development
kind of
rights.
general take on it, and I can,
I don't know
I
how
can
much they want to
synthesize that.
transfer.
Sure, yeah, why don't we do that? Let's just kind of do kind of a straw poll type thing. Everyone just, Scott, if you want to start, and just say kind of your final word on this, and everyone will get their final word, and then we'll see what Wade comes up with.
All right, so I guess just repeat what I said before.
Sure.
Okay, so I would be in favor of a new or existing structure and have it be part of the farm workings and to maintain the integrity of rural Fitchburg. And, and with the concerns that might be on the table about how people could do that, I think there is some creative ways to be able to articulate that it's being used for agricultural purposes, so.
Randy?
Yeah, actually, I'm leaning towards the farm-based and new or existing structure.
I guess similar along the lines of Randy, as long as it's somewhat farm-based. I like the large percentage of the area or venue being cropped or used as cropland, it has to be somewhat tied into agriculture. Maybe there's cattle operation, pasture, something related, I guess, tied in. New or existing structure doesn't make a difference. I do like the idea of the ADA accessibility in a new structure, just because that aligns with my line of work really well, but, so that's something that sticks out with me, but that can be done, I think, any way.
Thanks, Amy. George?
In agreement with all of what they've said, along with making it work somehow with transportation and yet continuing to highlight the ag practices, possibly making it a dual-purpose barn, not just weddings, if that's possible. I think we got a lot of research to do on it. I think we have to keep working at it, and I think it should be on the agenda and keep it going forward. Hopefully Wade can come back with what other areas have done that have worked, and there again, trying to get it into writing in a document that works for us, I guess, is a big issue.
I have to agree with everybody that has spoken already, and my biggest or my important thing is that as a new structure, that we take pains to make sure it fits into the viewscape and accompanies the the surrounding area as an ag type of a building. But I'm like everybody here. We've got a lot of work to do, and we can do it.
Okay, and I guess my position would be I'd like to, I would limit it to a retrofit of an existing historic barn. And I would absolutely agree with George that we gotta look at the transportation issue. Where is this being located? Be very selective about the locations that we would allow.
Yep.
From the standpoint of the roads.
And then I guess maybe just as a good place to end, kind of with Ed's point about transportation, does the committee have any instinct about, we've kind of got our future urban development areas, which are designated for someday development, probably will get there, Amy, and we plan for that. And then there's our non-future development areas. Is there any direction you want to give me on, at this point, are we open to any place in the rural area, or do we focus on urban development areas or not?
So the issue you were raising before, I think, was that if you put something like this in the future urban development area, eventually at some point then, you've got to redevelop it or develop around it.
Yeah, and I think if you really explore the true nature of why we want to encourage these types of uses is because it, quote unquote, supports agriculture. And if we're talking about areas that may not be agriculture in the next 20 years, does it really make sense to direct these uses there, or should we direct them to areas that we know will be in agriculture for the next 50 years? So,
It's a good point.
I would close the door on any area that's meant to remain agriculture. I think you need to really hone in and focus on protecting that. I would say this is a non-option for a new construction anywhere that's not already included in that future development area. That's my statement.
so you're saying like a wedding barn, whatever we decide on that means.
Exactly.
You're saying that should be in the future development areas or not?
I would say in the future development areas, I would shut the door hard on something that's not already.
Okay. But I guess by that logic, you also could create a scenario where if and when development gets to that area, because you've allowed these wedding barns, it doesn't fit in with the urban development. You know what I mean? Versus if you put them in the non-developed areas. I mean, two sides of the coin, but just so we're all aware of the issue.
My position doesn't change.
Okay. we don't have to go down that road at this point. I'll just, again, come up with some ideas for, I think I have a pretty good sense of what people are thinking, and I can certainly come up with a few options for the next meeting.
I do have another question. And I know you have enough on your plate to work on, but have you reached out to other communities? I mean, like, I'm going to say, I think it's the Stoughton area with the reserve. I mean, it's a very different situation. I'm not sure if it's in a cornfield or not. At least when I've been there, it just seems to be a field. But I didn't even know it existed until I drove in and up. And then they do shuttle people in when it reaches a certain capacity because the parking just doesn't meet the needs. I mean, I'd be curious to find out from other communities what some of the things that they ran into and some of the problems that have developed since that they've had to work through, some of those challenges.
Yep.
I don't know.
Yeah, no, I'm all about that. And I did talk with Dane County a couple months ago, and they gave me some basic direction.
Okay.
And in terms of like folks in the region that know what they're doing with ag planning, Dane County is pretty much, I know those folks, they're good planners. So I'll circle back with them and maybe get more detail on kind of, what they allow and how they do it, and maybe even check with some other counties. But yeah, we'll have that for you.
Okay, anything else on this topic, or I think we covered everything that you need?
Yeah, no, I think I got a good checkoff list here, and then I'll continue to process some of the wedding bar or egg entertainment things, and then we'll come back maybe with this sheet cleaned up next time, as well as some options on egg entertainment, if that sounds good.
Yeah, we need to put on the agenda next time, our RDC policy changes.
Yep.
Yeah.
We need to get to.
We do have a few minutes, if folks want to go down that road a little bit, or if you want to wait till.
Yeah, let me just ask, kind of going back to agenda review, that would take probably some time to address that, correct?
Yeah.
Or is
I
it,
guess.
or is it a
initial-
couple of quick questions?
Yeah,
that
so
we
just,
can-
staff's initial intent there was to just notify you guys of our interpretations over the past few years, and, the intent wasn't to create major modifications to RDC. It was really just to clarify, to put in writing how staff has been administering policy related to RDC over the past couple of years. So certainly if there's things that concern you guys, let us know, or let me know, but, I don't know, does that make sense? I know one issue Roger brought up, I'll see if I can get to it here. So I'm on page, last page of the packet. Give me a second here. Wait, what was that? I take that back. Go to page 9. Farm consolidation, number 1, second paragraph. About midway in that second paragraph, it says so this is talking about an existing home, rural residential home, that would be replaced.
Yep.
So claim isn't being used, just a replacement house. Currently, the way we interpret that policy is that the new home would have to be on the exact same footprint as the old home. I think Roger brought up the point last time about that might be a little bit stringent. And I think staff is open to exploring a little bit of flexibility there. Certainly, we wouldn't want to take any cropland out of production and that sort of thing, but there could be a little bit of wiggle room there. So that's one example of feedback that I can appreciate and we can incorporate. But again, this is really just putting on paper the way staff has interpreted a lot of our rural development policy over the past 10 years. I did go through it last time. I don't think we have time for me to give you an overview again. But, maybe a good way to end this would be just if folks want to review it, if they haven't already, and if there are issues, I can certainly discuss them next time, just shoot me an email and say, hey, wait, I want to discuss this next time. If I don't get any of those emails, I'll assume you guys are good with it, and we don't need to bring it back.
Did you address the idea of that 300 feet from a
Yep.
existing building? Will you change that to the existing building, not to the lot line?
Correct. We just, well, we clarified it. I mean, for
Yeah.
years, I think we were doing that, and then we had some new staff, and we were doing something a little bit differently. But
Yeah.
yeah, now we just are clarifying that that's the criteria, yeah.
Okay.
So one quick thought I had on that is that if we don't know where the house is going to go when we initially approved the lot and it comes back later and it is in keeping with the 300-foot distance, could that be just something approved by staff and not have to come back through the committees?
It is in keeping or isn't?
If it is,
Yeah, so that's the last part. I didn't put this memo together, but I'm just going to try to give you a quick answer here. So applicants are encouraged to include a house site location with the division application. I guess right now, we're saying it'll come back.
yeah, and my thinking is it wouldn't really need to come back if they're not asking for a waiver.
Yeah, and I know, okay, yep. Oh, I see what you're saying. So if they planned on a waiver and then they didn't actually need one, is that what you're saying?
Yeah,
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
or if you just don't know, when you create the lot, where someone's going to want to put the house.
Right,
No.
right. Yeah, let me debrief with other staff on that, then if there's additional thought on that, I'll let you know. If not, I think that is
Then-
reasonable.
The other clarification I'd recommend is just clarifying what claims can be transferred inside and outside of the FUTA,
Yep,
because I think the way we have it drafted is fairly specific.
did you get that email I sent you?
I did.
So just so folks know, and again, some of this may be, for the new folks, a little bit confusing, but the idea is we have development claims that can be used in kind of this clustered concept. So right now, if you are a landowner in a future urban development area, you can only use one of those claims. But if you have more claims available, they have to be used in a cluster. But the kicker is, we can't have clusters in our urban development area. So what that means is if I'm a farmer with more than one claim in a future urban development area, I have to transfer that out of the development area, i.e. I sell that or transfer that claim to somebody else, and then they can develop a cluster outside of the urban development area. Does that make sense?
It makes sense, but I'm not sure that that's what it actually
No,
says.
I did clarify that. So literally in the preamble to the RDC in our comp plan, it says no rural clusters in a FUTA.
Okay,
If you have more than one claim, you got to transfer them out. And then in our cluster ordinance, it says, in the preamble, it says no clusters in a FUTA.
okay.
So, and I can show you where that is, but yep, it was pretty clear.
Okay. So if there's anything else on this that anyone wants to either bring up now or just email Wade on and let him know if you want something addressed and here or clarified. If nothing else on that, let's, do we have an update on rural broadband?
I can quickly knock that out.
Let's do that, and then let's maybe look at the rural assessments. if time
So
or-
just hold on here. Roger, you can chime in here too if you want. But Roger and I did attend a meeting with our economic development people a while back regarding kind of the state program for rural broadband. And essentially what's going on is there is a grant program at the state level in which kind of rural entities, rural communities can apply for grants to bring rural broadband to those areas. It is I think a fairly in-depth application process. It is, I think, competitive. I know Fitchburg has been discussing better rural broadband for years. But I think the real kicker here is, in terms of application requirements, so basically either communities, public entities, communities can apply. But if they apply, they need to be in partnership with a utility that is able to service that area with broadband. So, again, it's a grant program, we could explore it, but we need, at some level, I think this becomes an economic development activity. And we would need to somehow figure out, is there a partnering, I don't know if utility is the right word, but a partnering entity that is interested and equipped to provide rural broadband in rural Fitchburg. And then if so, we could put together an application. Other than that, that's kind of all I know about rural broadband. Roger, I don't know if you had, yep.
That's pretty much going to be a phone utility then, right? Because the
Yeah.
cable companies are not going to be continuing to expand. They're not going to come out.
Yeah,
At this
the
point,
challenge,
they're dying anyhow.
the challenge is to find a partner.
Yeah, and it almost has to be
Yeah.
a telephone.
Maybe a telecommunications firm of some kind. Have you had any conversations?
No,
AT&T, TDS?
No, I guess my instinct on it would be, if there's a viable market, that entity would approach the city, you know what I mean? Versus.
Yeah, and that's the problem. AT&T would not come out to the rural area because of the capital investment. They just don't get that rate of return. So I'm just wondering, how do we facilitate that conversation, let alone?
And that's where I guess I'm kind of, just
Yeah.
to be clear, I think, obviously, I staff this committee. My background is in land use, that's my job. You know, I think as we start talking about this stuff, even though it is a rural issue, I think it becomes more of a economic development staff issue, in
Yeah.
my opinion.
That's why I was gonna ask,
Get
isn't that
Zimmerman to help
question
us.
for Mike Zimmerman?
Yeah.
Yeah, and Joyce, I
Mike?
think Roger Joyce was in on that meeting as well, just to make sure they're,
Oh.
but I'm just saying, if people, if the committee wants to go to the next step on this, I think we really need to engage with our economic development people to see, because they probably have those connections, Randy, or at least know who to go to.
Yeah.
So that's kind of that.
Yeah, I think this is something that the committee should be advocating for. I don't know that we have a solution to the problem, but Randy, I mean, I think, you know, as a council rep, I think it's important to know that this is an important issue to people in the rural area, and you
Well-
probably know that.
No question, but I'm not sure if you know my background as a retired engineer from AT&T. You know, I've had 30 years of this, and
that's
I fully understand why Fitchburg does not have it. Not that I have that, not that I would not have liked to have provided that, but that question from an AT&T standpoint always came from the direction of San Antonio or Dallas, Texas. I mean, you know, so those are things that those are some big hurdles to overcome. I'm just curious, are these grants, are they just large sums of money, and you partner with somebody like AT&T or possibly TDS, and then they build out that network?
Yeah, good question. I don't know all those details, but I imagine it's some level of funding that would make
Yeah,
it feasible for entities to come out and provide that
Yeah,
service.
yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, I would think that Mike Zimmerman would be a good one to
he would be.
bring to
We
the
can talk.
table on that.
Yeah,
In fact, I talked to him a little bit about just not long ago.
And just so folks know, it looks like as of now, you know, the application would be due December. So if this program is around next year, you know, December might be a likely deadline for some kind of grant application, so.
maybe Randy and Roger can get together and talk to Mike.
Yeah,
Sure, yeah, no, I would happy to entertain it, yeah.
Yeah,
that'll work.
okay. All right, and I don't know if there's anything else we can really do at this point. We're right at 6 o'clock, so
Good, yeah.
should we push potential rural assessments outreach to the
Next meeting.
next meeting?
I'm not,
I don't know what we're gonna do with that anyway.
I'm just going to say, I'm not sure, I mean, with all of the interviews and everything that have gone on right now, I think the people that are most concerned about it have voiced their opinion and gotten an answer. They may or may not like the answer, but that's the way it is. I feel that the meeting we had with Amy last meeting was just set a lot of things straight.
Okay.
And so I just don't know whether we need to pursue that. At the time, it sounded like a good idea, but I think we've got other important things to look at.
Does anyone disagree with that? All right,
Okay.
let's move on from that.
Great.
So we got through everything.
Way to go, yeah.
Report from staff,
Nothing off the top of my head.
next meeting.
Well, yeah, I guess if we got through everything today, I don't think we have anything, well, I guess we want to talk ag accessory stuff. So yeah, if folks want to do a November meeting,
Yeah.
let's see here, I guess the third Tuesday would be the 17th, if people want to do that, or I'm open to other dates too. Obviously, we got the holiday coming up.
Sounds good.
That's fine. Maybe, let's put the rural broadband back on that agenda as well.
Okay,
So that if Randy and Roger have something to report back, we'll have that as a topic of discussion at that point. And I think we could put at least an initial discussion of development rights on there as well.
so what kind of information are people looking for generally? Just some context, so in my prior life, before I came here, I did develop a PDR program for Rock County, south of here, Janesville. So, and I spent years, I mean, it was literally a year's worth long process, or multiple year process. I did put together kind of a manual of program development and implementation. I could certainly provide that in the packet as just general background.
Maybe give us an overview, because I think the things we need to understand are, what are the logistics behind doing this? In other words, how does it get funded? I mean, that's the big thing that we need to, I
Right.
think, talk about and make sure that we have reasonable expectations if we're gonna go down this road.
And I just wrap it up, I think there's two important things. There's actually planning for the program. I mean, I think what people sometimes fail to understand is, just like we plan for urban development, we plan for purchase of development rights. So we would be very strategic about places that we would focus on. You know, there would be eligibility, and then there would be, in my opinion, priority areas for acquisition. So just because you're in the rural area doesn't mean you can apply. I mean, that's important to put out there. And then I think funding is the second piece. When we developed the county program, we're in Rock County, there was, this was years ago when the state actually had a pot of money to distribute to municipalities with programs. And then what also happened is there was a federal program that also had a pot of money. So technically, you could get half your money from the feds, half from the state, and be fully funded to buy easements. Very soon after the state program came around, it was defunded under the previous governor. It has not yet been restored. So to Ed's point, there's still the federal pot out there. I don't know where that's at now, but we're talking big bucks. You know, and then I think the third piece here, I think, is when we talk about PDR programs, we normally talk about townships and counties. We don't talk about cities. You know, obviously, we're very unique in the fact that we're a city with rural area, but I just want to be very clear about the implications of a city permanently protecting farmland within its boundaries. I'm not saying it's not a good idea or it can't be done. I'm just saying it's unique. It needs to be.
No city has tried to do that.
Well, first of all, very few cities are like us, meaning.
That's right.
You know, some Milwaukee, like Brookfield, Germantown. But that's just, the whole point is, you know, because easements are forever, legally speaking. They can be overturned, but it takes court case and it takes time and money. So that's just what I really want to be clear, you know, if we're talking forever protection in a city, that's a whole different ballgame, so.
Okay.
Yeah, one thing that we have in our toolbox right now is that we have zoning. You know, we have zoning that protects the land, AX,
Yep.
which meets what the objective of transfer of developmental rights.
I think to Amy's point, and what I've experienced too, zoning can be changed. Easements are perpetual, so there's an added level of protection. But you're right, I mean, if a city's really good with sticking with its farm and preservation planning and its zoning, you don't need to spend the money. But if you got a lot of back and forth with ag zoning, then maybe a easement program's a better approach.
Okay, any announcements? Motion to adjourn?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. We're adjourned. Thanks, Wade.